So from the start of the Russian invasion of Ukraine and the escalating decision by the United States to become increasingly involved in that war, notwithstanding the fact that the position of the federal government for decades, including under President Obama, was that Ukraine was never and will never be a vital interest to the United States, whereas it always has been and always will be a vital interest to Russia. The obvious concern, one of them at least, aside from the gigantic sums of money that the United States government is spending, while its banking system, as you just heard, seems to be teetering on the brink of something, is that there's a very real likelihood of a direct hot war between Russia and the United States, the two countries which possess still the largest nuclear stockpiles on the planet, ones capable of destroying the world many times over. It's extra disturbing because that's all happening in the context of a worsening diplomatic relationship, which is basically non-existent at this point, between Washington and Moscow, where even decades-old arms treaties, arms control treaties, that were heralded by no one less than Ronald Reagan, who called the Soviet Union the evil empire, and at the same time emphasized the importance to humanity in negotiating arms control treaties. Basically, this entire arms control framework has now been disregarded, has now been allowed to all fall apart. There's basically just a bunch of nuclear warheads aimed at each other's cities with no open communication and no dialogue. And from the beginning, the concern has been, as it always is with nuclear war, not that two countries will suddenly go insane or a leader will get suicidal and just want to blow up the world on his way out. Although that's possible, that's not the most likely scenario of concern. Instead, the concern is unintended escalation by the kinds of things that can happen when two countries are involved in a very complex and sophisticated war right on top of each other. Even if they're not directly engaged, you can find them by accident or miscommunication or misperception getting engaged in the kind of conflict that can cause escalation to happen very quickly. We've already had several of those incidents where U.S. jets have been brushing up against American military hardware over the years, and now we have a very specific example, a very dangerous example of one that happened just today. Here you see the Wall Street Journal headline, which reads, quote, "Russian jet collides with a U.S. drone over the Black Sea." It just happened today. Details are pretty sketchy. My guess is a lot of journalists are relying on not necessarily the most reliable sources, but the Wall Street Journal is a more careful newspaper than most major outlets. So let's look at their rendition. Quote, "A Russian jet struck a U.S. spy drone over the Black Sea and knocked it out of the sky Tuesday," the Pentagon said, in one of the first direct military confrontations between the two nations' forces since the war in Ukraine began more than a year ago. The collision demonstrated how closely the U.S. and Russia are operating on the margins of a conflict zone, even as they aim to avoid incidents that could inflame tensions between them and widen the war in Ukraine. While the U.S. has provided Kiev more than $30 billion in military aid and equipment, as well as intelligence, and there's about another $70 billion authorized for other sorts of aid as well, it has said it wanted to avoid conflict with Russia. Tuesday's incidents demonstrated the challenges of supporting the war while, as the U.S. warned Tuesday, avoiding potential, quote, "unintended escalation." Early morning local time on Tuesday, two Russian Su-27 jet fighters and the U.S. MQ-9 surveillance drone originating from Romania flew near one another for about 30 minutes in international airspace, a U.S. defense official said. Let's remember this is the U.S. government's anonymous version of events, which has proven many times to be less than fully trustworthy. In an incident that lasted a matter of seconds, about 7 a.m., one of the Russian jet fighters flew past the drone, dumped fuel on it, and pulled away. The second jet then sought to do the same, but collided with the drone, a defense official said. The collision knocked off a piece of the MQ-9 drone, and the operators guided it down to the water. The U.S. hasn't recovered the wreckage, and officials declined to discuss any operations to recover it. The U.S. no longer sails its ships in the Black Sea following a Turkish prohibition on warships imposed after Russia's invasion of Ukraine last year. A Pentagon official described the incident as a, quote, "juvenile but accidental move by the Russian pilots." The Russian jets landed shortly after in Russian-held Crimea, a defense official said, and when one plane was damaged, it appeared operable. The drone captured the incident on video, which the Pentagon intends to declassify and release to the public, said a Pentagon spokesman, Air Force Brigadier General Pat Ryder. Quote, "This incident demonstrates a lack of competence in addition to being unsafe and unprofessional," said U.S. European Command, which is responsible for U.S. military operations in the region. So, the Wall Street Journal, using government officials, U.S. government officials, that's the U.S. government version of events. I'm certain Russia will have a much, much different version of events, but whatever else is true, this is direct contact, unintentional otherwise, between military hardware on the part of the Russians and the military hardware on the part of the United States. Something that you absolutely do not want when you're talking about two nuclear-armed powers with very little channels for communication to resolve these sorts of things. Now, let me show you a map, just in case, I guess our people in the studio had a little bit of fun. Here's the world map, just so you can see where all the countries are located. Here, showing in this orange, this red arrow is the Black Sea, which is where the incident took place. You can see it's quite far away from the United States, but is very, 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 very close to Russia. Here we see Russia, just to emphasize its proximity to the Black Sea as far as this incident is concerned. And there you see the United States, which is extremely far away from the region where it took place. Just in case anybody is trying to look for who is the provocative country here. Yes, very outstanding art on the part of our system update team. Really, really top notch. But it actually does make the point in an important way that so often this is what happens. I mean, I can show you maps, they can show you maps where you just move the arrow around and you can see, you know, hundreds of arrows pointing to U.S. military bases or other military assets operating very close to Iran, very close to China, whereas Iran and China or Russia have very, very, very few in this region over here of the United States. And so oftentimes what happens is you have this kind of weapon-free zone here, which you won't find any Iranian military assets, Russian military assets, or Chinese. And then you have things like this, which is the Black Sea, right there. Here's Russia, right here. There's all kinds of American planes and ships all over there. Here you have China and the South Sea. You have the U.S. assets in the Philippines, all throughout the region, very important to China, but no Chinese military assets all over here. That is the narrative of provocation that we're constantly fed, that these other countries over here, the ones that essentially have made the mistake of being surrounded by U.S. military assets, are the ones that are somehow provocative, and the United States is just over here minding its own business in the other side of the world. Thanks for watching this clip from System Update. Catch our full shows for free, live weekdays at 7 p.m. Eastern on Rumble, and join our locals community at greenwald.locals.com for all of my written journalism, exclusive after-show Q&As, and more.